The new book, Christina's Ghost by Betty Wren Wright. Chapter 1. Tears won't help. "Chrissy's gonna throw up again," Jenny shrieked the news. The back of Uncle Ralph's thin neck turned red. He swung the car off the road and braked at the edge of the steep slope. Chris hurled out of the car. Halfway down the hill, she knelt down and waited for the waves of sickness to overwhelm her. Nothing happened. A breeze cooled her forehead. The air was sweet after the pizza and oranges smell of Uncle Ralph's old Chevy. At the bottom of the hill, a stream glittered in the sun. Neat, Chris thought. She wished she could stay right there. She wished she could walk to grandmother's house in Oakley. Or fly. She was sure that if she got back into that car, she'd get sick again. "How about it, Christina? We haven't got forever." Chris looked up and saw Uncle Ralph and Jenny peering down at her. Uncle Ralph sounded annoyed, as usual. He sometimes called Jenny old girl, and he called other people sport or buster, but he always called Christina, Christina. "You sort of look green," Jenny said when we were back in the car. "Sort of green and sort of gray. You look very yucky." "That's how I feel," Chris told her. "Open the window on your side, okay? And don't eat any more oranges." For the next hour, Chris kept her face turned to the window and tried to think of good thoughts. Going to Grandma's was okay to think about. If she had to be away from home, she'd rather be out in the country with Grandma than anywhere else. Thinking about home, even for a second, was a mistake. Every time she pictured her house standing empty, she began to feel sick again. By now, her parents were in Seattle on their way to a 5 weeks conference and vacation in Alaska. No, don't think about that either. Think about sleeping in a sleeping bag out under the trees. Grandma let her do that as often as she wanted. Think about fishing in the little river a quarter-mile away. Think about exploring the old barn or climbing to the very top of the oak in Grandma's front yard. Last summer, she'd scrambled 2/3 the way to the top before Jenny saw her and tattled on her. The wind blew Uncle Ralph's visor cap from the back window shelf onto Chris's lap. She slicked her dark hair behind her ears and put on the cap, tilting it to one side. Then she leaned over the seat and twisted the rearview mirror so she could see herself. "Will you cut that out?" Uncle Ralph pushed the mirror back into position. His long, narrow face glowered at her. "And take off my hat, if you please." Jenny giggled. Chris took off the hat. "You don't like me," she said softly, but of course Uncle Ralph heard. "I do like you," he said. "It's just you always get things in a muddle, Christina. You don't think. I'm a past middle-aged man, and I suppose I have past middle-aged opinions. I happen to believe a girl, should act like a lady and dress like one," he added. Chris considered throwing the cap at him and decided she'd better not. She glanced down at herself and then at Jenny. Her sister's jeans, they looked brand new. Chris's were worn almost to whiteness, the way she liked them. Jenny wore a crisp red and white plaid shirt, and Chris wore an old t-shirt with a Spider-Man picture on the front and a hole under one arm. Even though Jenny was 8, 2 years younger than Chris, she insisted on blow-drying her pale brown hair so that it fell in waves around her face. Chris didn't care how her hair looked, as long as it didn't get in her way. "Chrissy's a tomboy," Jenny commented. "She can't help the way she is." Chris threw the cap at her. "Can you just forget it?" Uncle Ralph said. "Tomboys are okay. You're fine, Christina." But Chris knew he was counting the minutes until he could drop her and Jenny, too, at Grandma's house. Her mother had said they were lucky Uncle Ralph had even consented to take them on his way up north. He was an associate college professor at City College, and every summer he went off somewhere by himself. This year, a friend had asked him to house sit at northern Wisconsin Lake. Chris's mother said the human race was just too much for her brother Ralph. He liked his own company the best. "Chrissy bites her fingernails," Jenny said. "I wish she wouldn't, it just makes me sick." "And I wish I was an only child," snapped Chris snapped. Uncle Ralph switched to a classic music station and turned up the volume. He looked straight ahead as if he was pretending he was alone in the car. When they turned down the gravel lane that led to Grandma's house, Chris looked around eagerly. There was the big gray house. The old sheepdog Maggie lay under the oak tree. There was the barn, its door open and inviting. There was the porch swing and the red wagon planted full of white petunias. Everything looked exactly as it had a year ago, and they'd come with their parents. And this year, before Grandma never went racing, before that, Grandma never went off racing to Alaska to a stupid conference. Grandma loved the human race. Suddenly, Chris couldn't wait to give her a hug. "That's not Grandma," Jenny said. She pointed at the front door. The screen was partway open, and someone stood in the shadows. As the car turned into the yard, Aunt Grace, their mother's older sister, came out and waited at the top step. "Oh, give me strength," Uncle Ralph muttered. "She has that look on her face." "What look?" Jenny asked. The world would be a mess if she didn't take charge look," Uncle Ralph said. "That woman was born to give orders." They climbed out of the car, and Chris took a big breath of country air. Aunt Grace marched down the steps, and Maggie the dog waddled toward them. "I thought you'd never get here," Aunt Grace said, not bothering with hellos. Whatever took you so long?" Uncle Ralph scowled. "Christina had to make a few roadside stops," he said. "Where's Ma?" "She's in the hospital, that's where." For just a second, Aunt Grace, her thin face sagged. Then she sniffed hard and went on. "Got taken with the gallbladder attack at 5:30 this morning, and the Blackwells took her to the clinic in Rochester. Mrs. Blackwell just called. Ma's had her surgery, and she's doing fine." Uncle Ralph sat down on the porch step with a thump. "Poor Ma," he said. "Why didn't you go with her?" "No need," Aunt Grace retorted. "And she said to tell you not to go dashing over there till she feels better." She rolled her eyes at Chris and Jenny. "They've got their problems right here. We've got our problems right here." Uncle Ralph narrowed his eyes. He looked at the girls as if he'd never seen them before. "What do you mean, we?" he demanded. "You're here. You can look after them till Ma gets home." Aunt Grace gave an angry squeak. "I'm not staying here, Ralph Cummings," she said. "I just drove from town to tell you the news and close things up. The Blackwells will stop by every day to take care of Maggie. I have a house of my own to look after in Titusville, and 3 cats. No one can expect me to take over a family of children just because their parents went gallivanting off in Alaska." Chris felt her face burn, but she was too scared to say anything. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Jenny shrink back. "Then you can take the kids to town with you," Uncle Ralph said, getting up from the step. "I'm on my way." Aunt Grace moved between him and the car. "I have it all figured out, Ralph," she said. "I have only 1 bedroom, but it has twin beds. Jennifer can stay with me, and you will take Christina. We can't reach Jean and Philip today, but I'll call their hotel in Anchorage and leave a message about what's happened." "I'll take Christina?" Uncle Ralph looked at Aunt Grace as if he couldn't believe that what he'd heard. "Me?" "Christina can sleep on your couch." "It's a love seat. It's just too short." "She has a sleeping bag with her. She can sleep on the floor." "No!" 2 bright red spots flamed on Aunt Grace's cheeks. Her glasses flashed in the sun. "I can't cope with 2 children," she said. "I can't and I won't. You have to do your part in this emergency, Ralph. Don't you dare turn your back on your family in this hour of need." Jenny started to cry, even though she was the one who was wanted. "Nobody has to take me," Chris said. "I'll stay here with Maggie until Grandma comes home." Aunt Grace looked disgusted. "Don't be silly. You and Uncle Ralph will have a good time together. You can get to know each other real well." "He doesn't want to get to know me," Chris said. "And I don't want to get to know him." And to her horror, she began to cry, too. "Chrissy's crying," Jenny marveled through her own tears. "I never saw her cry before, not ever." The grown-ups stared. "Tears won't help," Aunt Grace said finally. "No need to get upset, Christina." She glared at Uncle Ralph. "Now look what you've done. You made the poor girl feel unwanted. Poor child." Uncle Ralph looked as if he had a mouthful of vinegar. He opened the car trunk and he tossed out Jenny's duffel bag. "Anything else in here yours?" he asked fiercely. Jenny shook her head. Then get in the car, Christina. No! Get in, I said, now. We have 3 hours of driving ahead of us. Chris looked at Jenny, the chosen child. She looked at Grandma's empty house and at Maggie, who seemed puzzled. Chris felt as if only Maggie understood her. Tears won't help. They were both in the way. Get in, Christina. Chris got in the car. There was nothing else to do. She wondered how many times more she'd be sick in the next 3 hours.